Everyone. Welcome. Okay, we get the notice that we are recording. Good morning. Welcome to today's news briefing on California's widening housing gap. I'm Pilar Barrero, your moderator for today. Thank you all for joining us. New data from Harvard's Joint Center on Housing Studies documents the widening gap nationwide between the supply of housing and the need for housing, especially affordable and low-income housing. Nowhere is this more acute than in California. Our speakers today will explore what the gap means as moratoriums expire, debts increase, and housing shortages grow, especially in small towns and rural areas. Our speakers today include Tina Rosales, policy advocate with the Western Center for Law and Poverty, Sarah Kimberlin, Senior Policy Analyst for California Budget and Policy Center, Francisco Dueñas, Executive Director of Housing Now, and Leslie Layton, Editor of Chico Sol, with Harry Halstead, a fire refugee who's given up on finding a new home. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Again, like Sandy said, we ask you to speak slowly for our interpreters. If you speak too fast, I may interrupt you and ask you to slow down. We invite reporters to enter questions in the chat box, and we will take them for each speaker and again at the conclusion of the panel. We will later send a video to today's briefing, expanded biographies of the speakers, and relevant collateral information. And so without further ado, we invite our first speaker, Tina Rosales, who will give us an overview of the key trends to watch in California housing. Ms. Rosales, please take it away.
Morning. Thank you so much for having me on this briefing. This is a very important issue and a hot topic issue in California today. So as Pilar stated, my name is Tina Rosales and I use she, her pronouns from Western Center on Law and Poverty. And I like to think of housing in three big trends, right? So the first trend is the eviction moratorium, which directly connects to increasing rental debts and increasing consumer debts on tenants. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay.
There is some kind of noise that I don't know where it's coming from, like a little weird, it's not an echo, but it's almost like a scratchy thing.
Okay, let me try again. Is this better? Is it not working?
I think it sounds better. Oscar, you can't hear? Yes.
Oh, the world of Zoom and how technology portrays
happens a lot.
Is it still working okay? It might be a microphone issue, but I don't have a mic. So this is what we
that's why.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that okay? Should we?
Do you have headphones?
My headphones don't work. Should we try kind of switching it up for another speaker and then I can try to figure this out?
No, it's fine. It's fine. No. Just go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So as I was stating, the first trend is the eviction moratorium, both the federal and the state moratorium. The second trend, oh, you know what? Actually, I just got headphones. Let me try this.
Oh, yeah. That could work.
Sorry, y'all.
That's okay. Okay, speak.
Okay, does this work better?
Okay, keep speaking. Let's see. Sounds okay.
Let's figure this out. Okay, so the second trend is going to focus mostly on equitable development. And then the last trend, which tends to get lost in the shuffle, is legal services for those who need them, particularly in rural counties. And so going back to the first trend about the eviction moratorium tenant protections, so there are two moratoriums, which I'm sure everybody is aware of. The first is the CDC moratorium, that's the federal one. We were just briefed that that is being extended for 1 month. And so there are protections for tenants and for renters and homeowners in the federal moratorium. But California has a stronger moratorium than the federal one. Right now, there is no deal just yet. And right now, the eviction moratorium is set to expire on June 30th. And that is a problem because thousands of renters can be thrust into homelessness, which we are trying to avoid. We have also been briefed that there is a tentative agreement between the legislative leaders and the governor where a bill will be in print and needs to be in print by tomorrow, by Friday, in order to have a vote on Monday. And what's good about this new agreement is that it offers 100% compensation for landlords for rent from April 2020 up to prospective rent for a total of 18 months of rental forgiveness per tenant. This is a bailout that no other industry has received in the pandemic, and essentially we're making landlords whole. There has been concern that the money has not gone out in fast enough quantities. Currently, California has $5.2 billion to spend on rental forgiveness, and we've heard that not a lot of that funding has gone out. So that we're hoping within the next few months, by working with advocates across the state and HCD, as well as education programs, particularly targeting areas in rural counties where there is a digital divide, where there is language access issues, that within the next couple of weeks and months, there will be an uptick in rental forgiveness going out to those areas. So transitioning to the second big trend is equitable development. And so we hear a lot of talks about there's not enough housing and we need to produce more housing, which is all well and good. And we definitely advocate for producing more housing. But when we produce housing, we need to think about it in a very equitable lens where we do not disrupt communities of color and we do not disrupt communities who are traditionally targeted when we think about housing development. And so I'm from the Mission District, and there was a huge production in the Mission when I was growing up, and it resulted in a lot of displacement of people. And because those people were displaced from the cities, they were moving out into more rural and suburban areas. And so just in California alone, we need about 1.2 million very low income housing units. And so that is where the person is making less than half of the area median income in order to sustain the need in California. And so when we think about equitable development, we also need to think about things like the producing housing that doesn't displace people and also comports with environmental guidelines. So that's things like we have people who are facing a lot of disasters, natural disasters that are unprecedented now than they have been earlier. And so when we produce housing and in order to house those individuals, because now that's increasing the shortage, we have to do it in a way where it doesn't displace already vulnerable communities and it doesn't override some of the CEQA protections that we already have. Because there are environmental disasters that are displacing people, there's also a rise in homelessness in rural areas, more so than urban areas. And so, for example, in Fresno, there's a huge increase in homelessness. In Butte County and in Watsonville, there are huge increases in homelessness because of the environmental impacts. And so when we're thinking about housing, we also need to think about homelessness and the environmental impacts, and how are we going to capture the increasing amount of people who are being displaced from these natural disasters. And then the last one is legal services. So a lot of things to note is that in rural areas, there is a disproportionate need of legal services for the legal services that are available. So currently right now in California in general, there is one legal service attorney for every 5,500 individual who needs a legal services attorney. And that's only predicted to increase while we have displacement, the expiration of eviction moratoriums, and increased housing instability. And one of the best ways to prevent homelessness is by offering legal services. Now, in areas where there are natural disasters, legal services are essential to ensure that people are protected and that they have places to go. Legal services are also essential when the eviction moratorium expires, because we know that eventually it will sunset and it will expire. And attorneys are very useful for ensuring that an individual is connected so that they can access all of the rights that are available to them. But it's not just legal services attorneys, it's also organizations and community-based organizations, such as the one that my colleague Francisco is a part of. In rural areas, there is a severe lack of legal services and organizations to support individuals in housing. And that is something where we need to allocate additional funding so that there can be more community-based organizations assisting people. But we also need to be very active in ensuring that the current legal organizations that are there have additional funding to address the unprecedented need that is eventually going to happen. And
Tina, you have a minute.
Oh, okay, great. I didn't know. So going back to the
But you're fine.
Okay, cool. So back to the CDC and the eviction moratoriums. I know that's really hot topic on everybody's mind, and the ensuing debts that are going to occur. So we do know that there's $5.2 billion available for rental assistance. We do know that there has been a shortage of money that has gone out. And so we're advocating to increase that funding. The funding is available, half of it needs to be spent by March 31st of next year. And so we're working with HCD, local organizations, to ensure that those who need the funding can get it. The Housing is Key website is where a person can apply for funding. There is a revamped application that is also going to focus on on translating it into several key languages, so that, because we knew that that was an issue with the first application. And then we're also working to ensure that there are uptakes in organizations to help people apply.
Thank you, Tina. I was going to ask that you check your button where it says mute and unmute. If you click on that upward arrow, there's something there that says select a microphone. You can select the input. I think you using headphones, but your input is still the same. So you need to change the input, I think.
Yeah, it's still it just says same as system. So I don't know.
So your headset is not registered there?
Yeah, I have no idea what's going on.
That's fine then. It's okay. It's okay. Fine. We're done. I wanted to go back to the 5.2 billion that have not gone out for the most part. Do we know why? Why has this happened? And what has been done to change that? How do you make it accessible? Obviously, it's not because of lack of need. It must be lack of something else.
So we don't have the data to say what's lagging. HCD has not released the data. What we have heard from advocates across the state and from applicants across the state is that the application was extremely onerous and it was asking for things that was not required in the federal application. So what HCD has done is revamped the application so that people can have easier access to it. And we've also heard that the application was taking about 3 hours to complete. And the community partners who were assisting individuals did not have the necessary manpower or resources to assist everybody. With that information, HCD has now revamped the application, so it's only supposed to take 30 minutes to complete. But again, we haven't seen the data, and we're going to wait to see if with the new applications, funding starts going out quicker.
Okay. I think Mark's question was addressed here. Araceli, do you want to ask your question? Araceli Martinez.
Yes, thank you, Pilar. What are the chances that the eviction moratorium is extended in California? We know that in at least in Los Angeles County, it was extended a couple of days ago. And also, do you have numbers that show us that it's really prevented eviction in the state?
So we have been briefed that there's a strong likelihood the moratorium will be extended until September 30th. The attorney in me does not want to commit to that date just in case it doesn't actually happen. But we have been told that there will be language tomorrow that will extend the eviction moratorium till September 30th. And then the second question, the second part of the question, can you repeat it?
Yes,
Is it still working?
Yes, is the moratorium really working in the state?
It is. So we know that evictions have, in areas where the eviction moratoriums have expired in different states, evictions have increased about 200%. In California, it's a little bit harder to track the evictions because we have masking protections, but we know that there have been thousands of non-payment of rent evictions that cannot go forward because we have the eviction moratoriums in place.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Tina, for that important information. We're moving forward. We still have questions in the chat, but we might go back to them, okay? So our next speaker is Sarah Kimberlin. She's Senior Policy Analyst with the California Budget and Policy Center, who will explain how the state's new budget is or is not addressing the housing gap. Sarah, take it on.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's so grateful for the invitation to be here, and it's so great to be here with Tina and Francisco, whose organizations are really key organizations in this work. So great to be with you all here. I'm representing the California Budget and Policy Center, and we are a nonpartisan, data-driven organization that focuses on evaluating public policies that affect Californians who have low and moderate incomes. And so I also just wanted to just explain just briefly, just to highlight that we really strive to be a resource for media and advocates and others who are looking for data about both what policies are moving through the state policy process and through the state budget process, and also for who are the Californians who are affected by these policies and these issues like housing affordability. So please do reach out to us if you have specific questions. And in particular, we cover many issue areas besides housing. And we particularly try to be a resource for pulling out data that focuses that may be local data or local on specific, for example, renters in San Bernardino County who are Latinx or Latino, or if you have very specific data requests like that, please reach out to us because we try to be a resource for that. We know that's hard to find sometimes, and I'll put some contacts in the chat. So today I'm going to talk about the work that we've been doing recently that's really directly related to housing affordability. And I want to also highlight a couple of my colleagues are on this briefing as well. So the three of us at the Budget Center who work most closely on these issues are myself and Aureo Mesquita, who's here, and Monica Davalos, who is not here. And our one of our comms communication staff is on this briefing as well, Mauricio Torres. So, and so first I'm going to talk about data about who is affected by some of the policies that Tina was talking about, and some of the issues that Tina was talking about. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the proposals that are related to housing affordability that are moving through the state budget process right now. So first of all, just to highlight the issue that Tina was talking about the expiration of the eviction moratorium or the extension of the eviction moratorium, this ties in really closely to some of the work that we've been doing recently, just to highlight who are the renters in California. So who are the people who are going to be affected if the eviction moratorium expires? And if you look at the data on who the renters are in California, you notice a couple of key trends. So Californians with low incomes are especially likely to be renters. So about 2/3 of Californians who have incomes below 200% of the poverty line are renters. Another key trend is that so there are a number of racial and ethnic groups that are more likely to be living in rental housing. So in particular, Black and Pacific Islander and Latinx or Latino Californians are especially likely to be living in renter households. And there are also American Indian households are more likely to be living in rental households compared to Asian and white households, individuals, I should say, not households. So when we think about who's going to be affected by policies that affect renters like the eviction moratorium, we know that these policies are going to have a particularly larger effect on Californians who are more likely to be living in rental housing. And Mauricio is dropping into the chat links to some of the publications that show charts and show these data written out. Also, if you look at immigrant status, Californians who are undocumented immigrants are also especially likely to live in rental housing, according to estimates based on data that we data sources that we use. They provide estimates of how many individuals are undocumented in California. So again, these are all groups that are particularly going to be affected by the eviction moratorium how long it's extended and the terms of the extension and the rental assistance to help people avoid eviction. So these are things that I think are really important to keep in mind. I think another really key context for that in terms of the data are to think about which California renters were already paying more than they could afford for rent before COVID hit, right? So we know that there was a housing affordability crisis before the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you look at the data on which renters were paying an unaffordable amount towards housing even before COVID, again, you see differences. This is not spread equally across all Californians, right, in terms of the burden of the housing affordability crisis. So just pull up my numbers to make sure I get them right here. So for example, if you look at Californians with low incomes and households with low incomes, a full 85% of those households were paying more than 30% of their income towards rent before COVID, right? So that's considered an unaffordable amount. And 61% of them were paying more than half of their income towards rent. And so, I mean, that's a really significant share. That means that those are Californians who are really at high risk of really facing an emergency if their income is interrupted. And similarly, if you look at the rates of unaffordable housing by race ethnicity in California, among California renters or Californians who are Black who are living in rental housing have a particularly high rate of paying an unaffordable amount towards housing before COVID. So about 60% of Black individuals in rental housing, and also more than half of Latinx individuals in rental housing were paying more than they can afford towards housing before COVID.
Sarah, we need to go a little bit slower for the interpreters, and you have 1 more minute.
Okay, thank you. I think these trends are also important because it matches up with who has been most affected by the job losses during COVID and where are we still waiting for the recovery. So if you look at employment is still down for workers with low wage jobs and for Black and Latinx workers in particular. So you have a sort of match between the workers who are most likely to still be unemployed are some of the same Californians who are most likely to be renters and most likely to be paying an unaffordable amount towards rent even before the COVID pandemic. So this is something that we're tracking closely at the Budget Center. In terms of the state budget process, there are the rental assistance program that Tina was talking about is one of the most important things to address the immediate crisis regarding people's ability to pay the rent. There are also a number of proposals that are being considered for the state budget that address housing affordability more generally, including the production of housing and affordable housing. Almost all of those proposals rely on federal dollars that are coming to the state from that recent bill passed through Congress, the American Rescue Plan. And so we have some resources that we'll drop in the chat that describe those dollars and the specific proposals that the governor has put forward. And as Tina mentioned, this is a area where the governor and the legislature are right in the middle of finalizing the final details of what the budget will look like next year, which will include the details of exactly how those dollars are spent to support the production of affordable housing. And so that's something we'll be watching really closely when it does, when it is finalized. The Budget Center will be putting out a summary, so we can drop in. Yeah, we have some report on the governor's May proposal, and so that's sort of the basis of the negotiations that are happening right now. But the final budget will be a little bit different, and as soon as that comes out, we'll put out more. And again, I'll be happy to answer questions here or later, including, there are data about rural areas, but I can get into that at another point. So thank you.
Well, you do have time for questions. So there is a question by Yaya here in the chat. Talk a little bit about the difference between renters in rural areas and urban areas.
Sure.
If you will.
I mean, I think something that's really striking about housing affordability in California is just how widespread of a problem it really is. And so, I think everyone thinks about this being a problem in areas that are like urban areas with really high rental costs. So we think about, San Francisco rents or that kind of a thing. But the fact is, when you look at, if you look at urban areas and rural areas and different parts all throughout the state, in parts of the state where rents are lower, also incomes tend to be lower, right? And so it means that there still is a really major problem of a mismatch between how much people are making, how much income they have, and how much they're paying towards rent. So we have, we've looked at data, for example, across, if you look across all of the regions in California, so say like the, dividing California into regions, across urban regions and rural regions, there are more than half of renters are paying an unaffordable amount towards housing. So, in the Central Valley, it's 51%. In the San Francisco Bay Area, it's 44%. That maybe is lower because incomes tend to be higher there, right? There are some people who have very high incomes there. Sacramento region, it's 52%. Los Angeles and South Coast, 55%. So it's a trend that you see across the state. And again, if people are interested in more granular detail, like down to the county level or that kind of thing, I encourage you to reach out to us.
There's a question here from Srishti. Srishti, you want to ask your question? Srishti Prabha.
Hi, thank you for your information. Hi, what are adjustments that you guys are actively lobbying for to the California proposed budget? Because you said you were.
So I'll say the California Budget and Policy Center, we are not actually a direct advocacy organization. So we say our role to put information out there about what policies will do and how they'll affect people, but partners like both Western Center on Law and Poverty and Housing Now do more direct advocacy work. So I probably should defer that question to Tina and Francisco.
And we are going right now to Francisco Dueñas. So thank you so much, Sarah. Stay around for more questions maybe later if you can. Okay, and so I welcome our third speaker, and that is Francisco Dueñas, founder of Housing Now, who will share findings from a recent study by his organization and Policy Link on housing. Francisco, welcome.
Thank you, Pilar. Thank you, Ethnic Media Services, for the invitation. My name is Francisco Dueñas. As Pilar says, I am the executive director, not the founder. The coalition was around a couple of years before I started, but I'm really happy to be here. I've got a few slides which will help me make sure that I'm taking best advantage of my time. Is that okay if I can share them? Share my screen?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, can folks see that?
Yes, we can see.
All righty, thank you so much. Let me just make sure to scroll. So thank you again for the invitation. So we are a big tent coalition. So we have over 100 organizations that are part of our coalition, and we are an advocacy organization, like Sarah said. So our goal is to being in communication with our coalition partners and let them know what is happening in the Capitol about housing policies that affect low-income communities of color. And then we do the opposite, communicate back to the Capitol what our communities need. And that is both in regards to the production of more affordable housing, as well as to protecting against the displacement. So that is, just a little bit about us. We talked a little bit about, Tina and Sarah talked a little bit about this, so I'm not going to delve too much into this. I don't know if we mentioned exactly how many people are behind on their rent currently. I don't know if I missed that, but it's 700, around 700,000 households, which comes out to be around 1 million Californians in California are currently behind on their rent. And then, just 8 in 10 renters are behind on their rent, lost employment during the pandemic. So the rest is stuff that Sarah went over this, and I can share this with for us to send out in the email, follow-up email. Let me put in the chat briefly. We have a study that we published called "Preventing an Eviction and Debt Epidemic," and this is just the cover of it. Here are some of our key findings. The study was of tenant supporting organizations, some of which are coalition partners, but not all of them. In general, we found that eviction protections are, and the relief, like the rental assistance, it does help promote health and well-being as well as it's saving lives. But only if people can access that support. Two, that some landlords are continuing to evict tenants even despite the moratorium and the rent relief. So Araceli asked whether that moratorium is helping or is effective. It is being effective. The rates of eviction are lower, but that doesn't mean that no evictions are happening. So there are evictions that are still happening. Third, we found that there are barriers and restrictions that are blocking households getting this help, getting the rental assistance. And then finally, which we've talked about, Sarah and Tina talked about, that many renters will face a long recovery, not just because of the rental debt, but other types of debt as well. So just starting off with one of the major messages that I would like everybody to take away is that housing is health. Housing is a public health issue. This is something that is pretty well established, but I don't think in our general community, everybody understands this yet. There are some of the impacts that we saw during this time because of the COVID housing instability or the lack of access to the rent relief. People should know that our organizations indicated that their clients, their members were having mental health concerns. There were family members in the household that got COVID. They saw overcrowding housing because of that leads to greater COVID exposure. And finally, using some monies that is going to rent, no longer going to other things like medicines or food, right? So these are, again, the way that housing is held. Other studies that public health officials have done, or public health researchers have done, have shown that across the country, oh no, this is just California, this data, our eviction protection law has prevented 186,000 cases of COVID and 6,000 deaths, 6,000 COVID deaths because of the eviction protections. So that's, I think, important for people to know. And just this testimonial that we were collecting, you know, this person was talking about how much stress they were in. And, but once they got that rent relief, how they were able to focus on their health again and their well-being. And now they are negative and are able to work again. And that is from a testimonial from a support organization in San Diego. So with respects to what are some of the causes of the housing instability, you know, what are the things that tenant supporting groups are seeing out there? As I mentioned, landlords are very frustrated that they also have not gotten this rental assistance. And so they have threatened eviction to their tenants. They have harassed their tenants. A lot of tenants have moved because they feel they didn't want to continue increasing their rent debt, right? So they moved by themselves, or maybe they were harassed too much and that's why they moved. Our supporting organizations also said they had clients who had become homeless during this time and who were evicted. And so just so that folks hear a testimonial, I talked about how health is housing and housing is health, but it also affects so many other things. It affects your opportunity to have a job. It affects the education of kids. It affects, you know, if you become homeless, there's a greater likelihood of those children going into foster care. And then it has negative credit and long-term financial impacts. And then just briefly wanted to talk a little bit about what are some of the barriers to accessing the rental assistance. Tina mentioned these earlier. The highest one that we saw in our study was technological. When the application for the state program first started, you needed to have an email address. The application was only online. There was no paper application. And people didn't have, you know, access to Wi-Fi. You needed to upload documents. So there was a lot of technological requirements that many people in our communities aren't able to meet, access. Other barriers, you know, it's sometimes difficult to be in communication with your landlord. Some tenants do not even know who their landlord is. Maybe they just have, you know, a property management company. Immigration concerns were something that came up for a lot of people. We just had 4 years of presidential administration that was saying any help that you get, you know, is going to count against you from, you know, in your immigration proceedings. So I can understand why many immigrants might have worry about that affecting their future possibilities of regularizing their immigration status. And then finally, you know, fear of being harassed by their landlord or retaliating, or just not having the documents they need to prove that they lost income.
And Francisco, I don't know if you're at the end of your presentation, but you have 1 more minute.
Okay, I am. So just our groups that we collected this information from said they needed more monies and, you know, improved language accessibility for undocumented and monolingual tenants. And they needed more help and support, more funding. They felt that these, you know, they were being asked to do a lot. I will end my presentation just by sharing a little bit about what are the recommendations that we had. So we did call for an extension of the eviction protections and having them be stronger, like to include credit protections, and then to remove those barriers to the rental assistance programs. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Francisco. And I hear that you also could do interviews in Spanish if you had to later. Oh, that's great. It's good to know. And thank you for that very specific presentation with numbers and everything, like the other ones. Amar is asking a question that I think is a very good question, and it's probably general, but let's have him ask the question so to see what your thoughts are. Amar, can you ask your question, or do you want me to do it?
So a small surprise, it's not Amar, it's Vansh asking the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're good.
You're using Amar's Zoom, okay.
Yeah, we're both together today. All right, so the question I have is, many of these issues can be associated to landlords running their rental units as a business. As we see the trend in Silicon Valley, we see many people buy properties for investment. And because of that, the house value goes up and rental prices go up. And it's a very simple economic curve, right? Supply goes down and demand goes up for the rental market as well. So how can people get access to affordable housing if the trend is to commercialize housing and land available? And a follow-up to that are, landlords are the key factors in people facing homelessness, harassment, increasing rent, fear of getting evicted. So what can we do to tackle this issue?
And you can respond. You have to answer that in 1 minute. Sorry.
Well, if I could just start and then I'll hand it to Sarah and Tina, if that's okay. All right, I don't hear any objections. Sorry about that. I just want to start
because we only have 1 minute. We have 2 more speakers.
For everybody. Okay.
Yes.
Briefly, it's a really great question. I do think many of our advocates are pushing for more land and more properties that are outside of the private market and are in the control of the community, like land trusts or affordable housing itself is a alternative to market rate housing. So we are definitely pushing for more of those alternatives. I will say, just to turn it over, being a landlord is a business, but you don't need a business license, at least at the state level, to do that. And so it's a very unregulated business for landlords.
Okay, and we do have 2 more speakers, and I'm sorry to be running this as a general in the military, but we have 5 speakers today. So I'm going to move forward, and then if we have some more time, we'll cover that. Thank you so much, Francisco. Okay, so our final speakers are based in Chico, a new frontline in the housing crisis, and they are Leslie Layton, she's the editor of Chico Soul, and Larry Halstead, a fire refugee who lives in an RV. Welcome both.
Thank you so much, Pilar and Ethnic Media Services. We really do feel we're on the front lines up here in terms of both climate change and this housing crisis. And I've been working on a story. A lot of the research I've done shows that indeed this area is one of the worst for being sort of out of whack in terms of what people earn as opposed to what they can pay for rent or even a home. And so the homeless population in Chico was growing pretty quickly, I think around 2015. And then in 2018, we were hit with the Camp Fire, which destroyed the town of Paradise, and that's 12 miles from Chico. So that destroyed our areas, a lot of our areas' affordable housing stock. And I think, that's true throughout California, that a lot of times people live in fire-prone areas because it's where affordable housing is. And so we lost about 15,000 housing units in that fire and got about 20,000 new people in Chico. And housing prices soared because people were coming in with insurance payouts. Rental prices soared because a lot of property owners evicted their tenants and sold while prices were high. And the demand is just so much greater than the stock. So the homeless population in Chico has literally exploded. We've got we think about 1,000 people here now who are homeless, if not completely unsheltered. And about a quarter of those are refugees from the Camp Fire, or maybe even a few of them from the Bear Fire in 2020, which destroyed some of the homes in the foothills. And it's really affected Chico. It's been pretty traumatic. You know, we elected a new city council in November because homelessness was such a hot button issue. They promised a very harsh approach, and they've implemented that. And so the city is now being sued by Northern California Legal Services and trying to reach a settlement. And we've seen the growth of some pretty conservative groups who just use standard language like vagrants and transients, when actually most of our homeless population is from this area. So in the course of doing this work, I met Larry, who is involved both as somebody who has been unsheltered himself and is a journalist and an activist. And he agreed to share some of his first-person experience today with the obstacles for him in getting any kind of housing. And I learned last night that the crises for him even got worse. So thank you very much. And thank you, Larry.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group. First of all, just because being a member of the media myself, but secondly, the fact that you guys are focusing on the housing and the fact that this is ethnic related, and so all that is sort of dear to my heart. But I want to mention a little bit more about my background, because it's through those eyes that I've witnessed and participated in this disaster. My education is a political scientist. I am a lifelong activist. I've been a member of the media for about 4 decades now, in different capacities. And I also have about 12 years worth of litigating civil rights cases in the courtroom, even though I'm not a licensed attorney. And so for the last 20 years, I've been covering California Democratic politics, 15 years as an elected delegate, and 5 years at least as a credentialed member of the media. And in that capacity, it's allowed me to interact with our state leaders, and including especially Gavin Newsom. It turns out we're actually related, and I've been nurturing a relationship with him since he was mayor of San Francisco. My brother married a Newsom. So when this Camp Fire happened, which people need to understand, this is the most deadly fire in California history. And roughly 100 people died. They put a smaller number, but there was homeless and other people that weren't counted. And I believe there's bodies out there that'll someday be discovered. But the fire happened on November 8th of 2018. And I'm in Magalia. In fact, I'm in an RV right now that I'm being evicted of as today, but I'm sitting 2 blocks from where my house burned down. And Magalia is just right above Paradise. As Leslie mentioned, the fire displaced some 50,000 of my closest friends. It resulted in the loss of some 15,000 homes. And if you just flip that and say, hey, you know, if we all got together and we came up with a great housing solution, how to create more housing, and we came up with a plan that could create 15,000 homes, we'd be so excited about that. But in one moment, 15,000 homes were lost. And so my story, which is starting to get a lot of attention, is significant because it's significant on 2 fronts. First of all, it is the absolute, everything about my story makes everything about the war on homeless, their narrative, a lie. So they try and paint you as all these pictures. You don't want shelter and you're drug addicts and all the rest of these things. And so my story makes all of that a lie, but also because my story intersects with all these larger issues that contribute to homelessness and whatnot. So just real briefly, we had our own harrowing evacuation, flames, vehicle breaking down, lost pets, etc. And we ended up escaping over to Willits, California by the coast, Mendocino County. And we were homeless, a family. I have 5 adopted kids and a special needs, a disabled wife. And so, I was the caregiver to them all. And we ended up being homeless over in Mendocino, Fort Bragg, for 3 months before I was able to secure a house in Willits, California. And interesting, and I think it's important for this discussion, that here in Magalia, we were paying $1,000 a month in rent. And over there, which actually has similar demographics, it took us 3 months to find a place, and we were paying exactly double that, $2,000 a month. And I was living there with the family for a year and a half when, long story short, it was basically, I was doing my activism thing on helping homeless, and I was trying to create documentation. I was documenting the fight against PG&E and trying to generate reports for the governor and for the attorney general, for that matter, about the plight of the Paradise Camp Fire survivors. And over there in Willits, there is no backup support. There's a huge community in Chico of advocates and activists and helpers. And so over there, what happened was I ended up getting picked up and accused. It was a weaponized false accusation of being suicidal for helping a homeless man that I was trying to help in our backyard because of the pandemic. So the pandemic added this extra bubble of insulation. So anyway, I was dragged down here to Chico by ambulance, a cost of maybe $30,000 or more. And I was in a mental health facility for 4 days when they figured out I was not suicidal. And then I was just released on the streets of Chico without anything. And I thought I could recover within days. And I approached the police, couldn't get help from them. And it took me until September, from April to September, before I could even get a phone, one of the free phones. And that allowed me to start searching the internet and contact a friend that was able to buy me glasses and a new phone. And so that allowed me to start acting in my role as documenting this war on the homeless. And in the process, I made them give me a citation. We just resolved it, a civil disobedience, and resolved it in the courts. But the important thing that needs to be said here in the little time I have left is that as soon as I was able to get a phone, I immediately started hunting for housing assistance through the county housing assistance program, through the city housing program, through the nonprofits, and through the advocates. And because I have late stage cancer, I am a client with a county agency called Disability Services. And I was reaching out even to Cancer, American Cancer Society, et cetera. So I really felt that I had exhausted all of those possibilities. And to date, I have gotten none. I live off of $200 worth of disability and $194 of food stamps. December 6th, I filed for pandemic unemployment. And a month or so ago, I had to get the assemblyman office involved, fill out a whole new set of paperwork, and I still have not received 1 penny of pandemic unemployment. So, the obstacles are huge. It's really easy, and people don't realize how easy it is to become homeless. It's not just things like the campfire, it could be divorce, it could be, health, chronic, a huge health issue can make you unemployed, homeless. So, there's all of these factors that go into it, but it's a doorway that it can happen overnight, just like the fire did. But trying to get back and trying to recover, I consider myself to be a problem solver and a crisis manager. And
Larry,
Yes.
Can you close, please? Can you close?
Yes. So anyway, you know, I do appreciate you folks listening and actually having me on here. But I just want to say, if there's follow-up, whatever, I'd be happy to talk to you. But the plight of the homeless on this new pandemic of fires is going to be, we could break the record of this being the most deadly fire in California this year.
Thank you so much for that. And sorry, we had too many speakers today, but
That's
they
all
were
right.
all really, they were all really important. I have a final question, or at least one of, maybe we'll have time for two. Let's see. Okay, let's leave that final question. Shristi has a question. What was your question, Shristi? What, oh, okay. What are the adjustments that any of you in the call, any of you in the panel would like to see the budget in the California budget? Anyone that wants to answer this question?
I will.
Okay.
My big thing, even before the fire, was to create a tiny home village, and I've been doing researching and all of that. And I think ADUs are an answer, but I think the tiny house, it's a movement, and it's something that appeals to seniors, young people, all kinds of people. But it is a solution for creating housing. And there's a lot of people who would rather do that than pay a big mortgage. They like to live in a tiny home, and so I think that's something that really needs to be addressed and supported.
Okay, Tina, do you have anything in particular?
So Francisco, myself, and a couple of our coalition partners actually worked on some joint budget asks, and I think it would be beneficial to share those asks. So
yes,
I can share them. I'll put my email in the chat, and if y'all would like the budget ask that we compiled, we can share that.
You can send it to us, and we can send to all the media.
Okay, perfect. But the main highlights are, we want to see more investment in community-based housing, equitable development for housing, as well as an increase in solutions and wraparound services for those experiencing homelessness, along with, you know, the rental relief assistance.
Anything to add, Francisco?
No, I'm good.
Okay, well, there's a final question that Sandy was asking me to, and I think it's still relevant. What's the most important positive thing each speaker sees in addressing housing? Tina, is there any hope in the horizon?
Oh, of course.
Okay, good.
Yeah, one of the really great things that we are seeing now is housing is no longer a bubble just for the elite. And the power is very much in the community, and it is very much shifting towards the community. So people like Larry and people in Francisco's organizations, they hold the key to making very significant policy changes in housing. And they have been showing that getting tenants together, getting homeowners together, and even landlords together to really push for equitable policy changes, I think is the best way that we're going to make significant changes that improve the life and the well-being of most individuals.
Thank you. Sarah, I know you're the numbers person, the data cruncher, but is there any trend in your data or numbers that is hopeful, or is anything bad? Is everything bad in terms of housing?
No, I think one thing that's been really powerful about the COVID pandemic is it just has really brought people's attention to some issues that were, major challenges before COVID, right? So people have been thinking about what do renters do when their incomes are drop and they can't afford the rent? I mean, this was a major problem before COVID, and it's, now people are more broadly aware of it. So I think there's a real opportunity to think about how we can solve California's structural housing affordability problems moving forward. And I know there have been some significant planning efforts where advocates and data crunchers and lots of people have gotten together to try to think about, what are the kinds of policy solutions you would want to put in place over the long term that would make a difference. So one of those efforts recently was the Roadmap Home effort that I know Francisco was actively involved in, and Western Center was also involved in. So I'll drop in. There's a really comprehensive report just outlining 57 different policies that would make a difference in terms of addressing the long-term problems related to housing and homelessness. And so yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, it's a major crisis and it requires a lot of different efforts on different fronts. So, but, you know, I think the only way to address it is to start chipping away at all those different fronts.
Yes, thank you. Francisco, anything to add in terms of hopeful signs or
No,
anything
I
good?
think, I think a combination of what Satina and Sarah said, I think more people are understanding that housing affects all parts of our lives, and that, as an identity, the US has mostly supported and lifted up and championed homeowners and home ownership. But I think people understanding that these are fluid things, not everybody, we have homeowners that decided to sell so that they can move in with their parents, elderly parents, and take care of them. So like Larry was saying, it's so easy to become a homeowner, become a renter, become homeless, that these are not stable identities. And we need measures to prop everybody up, right? So that everybody is healthy and safe.
To close, so Leslie and Larry, do you have anything to add in terms of what, anything positive you see at this time?
Oh, I don't really have anything positive to say, but I have a question.
As a good reporter.
Yeah, right. I'm a reporter. Are there any state requirements for local jurisdictions to meet affordable housing standards or provide a certain amount? Because I know their goals, and I know that places like Chico are failing miserably to meet those goals, but there's no interest in local government here in this. And so for places like, Chico, there needs to be some kind of state requirement that this get done.
Is that a question to anyone in particular?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody knows.
Well, actually, this would be a good place for me to chime in with my 2 cents on this, because for the last 2 months, I've been submerging myself in the rebuilding of this area of Paradise, Magalia, whatnot. It's called the Ridge. And so right now, there are lots and lots of campfire survivors that want to rebuild on their property, but none of us have gotten any money on the PG&E claim yet. And so Paradise just passed an ordinance that you have to be off your property by the 1st if you haven't filed a building permit. And so the key, I think, to getting more affordable housing is to see what those obstacles are. And there are starting to show up some answers. The startup cost about putting in a septic tank and building fees and all that needs to be something that funded directly, either in a low interest road or whatever, that could free people up to start building these low income housing. The Ridge here was mostly a lot of low income housing, and there's a lot of people that want to build those kind of houses, but no one can do it right now. And so if you remove those obstacles for building the low income housing, and I understand the state of California just came up with a new program where they're going to put up to $200,000 to be a silent partner in buying a house. And so I think these are some of the issues that could really, really help right now with getting more affordable housing built.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it on to.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I just wanted to follow up
Okay.
to the question. So generally there is requirements that there have to be affordable housing, but there is a bill right now called AB 1304, which is to amend the planning and zoning codes that includes housing element law, so that there is an affirmative that counties and jurisdictions have to affirmatively further fair housing. I'm also happy to share that fact sheet to everybody. And my colleague Cynthia is the one that works on it. So if you need more information, I can direct you that way.
Thank you.
Great.
I could just
Great.
add,
And there are comments and links in the chat. So make sure you check those, and the links, we can pull them and send them to you. Sandy?
Just a big thank you to all our speakers for helping us. A lot of this has to do with our own confidence. Mine is very low when it comes to housing. I don't know the field well enough. So listening to you and learning from you all opens or encourages me to think we can do more. One very important thing we ask you to do, if we send you everybody who is on our attendee list today, could you put us on your email list to let us know when you do reports, let us know when you do briefings? Think of asking us to help you do a briefing when you have a very important set of data or analysis to share with us. We need to be at the table with you. We need to take greater responsibility for covering this issue. And you are going to be very helpful to us to do that in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pilar.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
All right.